It is 2020. The world is on fire. And in the quiet of your apartment, you are having the most unexpected experience of your adult life. You are carefully, in a way you will not admit to anyone, happy. Not because you are unaware, not because you do not see what is happening to the people around you, but because for the first time in years, maybe in your whole adult life, the world has accidentally been rebuilt around accommodations you had always needed and never been allowed to ask for. There is an entire population of people who quietly experience lockdown like that. And according to research on individual differences, they were not selfish. They were not heartless. They were simply, for a brief window, finally at pace with themselves. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear is not a defense of lockdowns. It is an honest look at what happens when the world, by accident, starts running at the speed of its quietest people. Let us start with what was actually happening in the nervous systems of those people before any of this began. Psychologists have known for decades that what gets called normal life is not neutral. It is a specific pace, a specific intensity, a specific social density that fits some nervous systems far better than others. Research by the psychologist Elaine Aron across the 1990s, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, documented something she called sensory processing sensitivity. About 20% of people process incoming stimuli more deeply than the average. More associations, more subtleties, more fatigue per hour of input. For them, a crowded train, a noisy open plan office, and a full after-work social calendar are not neutral background. They are a cost. Another branch of research, unmasking in socially anxious and autistic adults, documented something similar. The cognitive effort of performing a socially acceptable version of yourself all day accumulates quietly across years. Translation: for a subset of people, what most of the world called normal life was a kind of permanent, low-grade endurance event. They did not know that because they had never been allowed to experience anything else. And then something very strange happened. The event paused. But here is where it gets interesting, because when the world slowed down, not everyone reacted the same way. You know that feeling when you have been holding in a breath you did not know you were holding? That is roughly what many of these people described in the first weeks of 2020. Researchers were curious about this. A 2020 study led by Tim Krunke, published in the Journal of Research and Personality, tracked thousands of adults before and during lockdown and found something the early headlines had missed. Average well-being dropped, yes, but a meaningful subgroup reported that their well-being actually improved. A 2021 paper by Hannes Zacher and Kurt Rudolph in American Psychologist reviewing the emerging literature identified several profiles who consistently showed this pattern. Highly sensitive people whose nervous systems finally got a break from ambient stimulation. People with social anxiety who no longer had to perform casual friendliness at a coffee machine. Caregivers, especially mothers of young children who, though exhausted, quietly welcomed the collapse of other social obligations. And people with long commutes who gained 2 to 3 hours a day of their own lives back. Notice the pattern. These were not the people who had been vocal about struggling before lockdown. They were the people who had been quietly struggling in ways the culture did not recognize as real. When the culture changed, their struggle briefly stopped. Now, where it gets a little uncomfortable because it is more personal than most people want to admit. A significant portion of these people have still never told a single soul that they were happier in lockdown, because doing so would sound callous, while others were grieving, while others were losing their jobs, while others were alone in ways that broke them. And the two things can both be true at the same time. You can hold genuine grief for what the pandemic did to the world, and also quietly admit that for you, the accommodations it forced saved something. While the rest of the world was posting about missing parties and concerts, these people were internally narrating. I could finally hear myself think. I could finally eat lunch in silence. I could finally wear soft clothes to a meeting. I could finally exist in a room without being watched. The present moment enters briefly, and then the guilt of having benefited from a tragedy bulldozes right over it. If that is you, here is the reframe. You do not have a compassion problem. You have a mismatch problem that was briefly and accidentally resolved. Those are very different things. Your relief was not celebration of other people's pain. It was the first signal ever of how much pain you had been hiding just to be normal. And let us talk about what actually got taken away again, because most people have not named it. You can see exactly what happened. As soon as lockdown ended, the commute came back. The open plan office came back. The mandatory small talk came back. The weekend calendar filled up with events you felt you should go to. And for many of these people, a specific, dull, exhausted feeling returned within weeks. They had glimpsed what their life could be if it were structured for them, and now they had to go back. Research in journals, including current directions in psychological science, has documented what is sometimes called post-pandemic adjustment asymmetry. Most people bounce back to their pre-pandemic baseline. A subset did not, because their pre-pandemic baseline had itself been a slow erosion. For them, lockdown had not been a crisis. It had been an interruption of a crisis, and reopening was the resumption of one. You do not hear these people much on social media because admitting this out loud sounds ungrateful. But privately, in therapy rooms and quiet group chats, it has been said over and over. The lockdown never broke me. The return did. And there is one specific after effect of lockdown that most of these people now describe, which almost nobody predicted at the time. The forced simplification of their social life ran a quiet, brutal audit. When the office stopped, when the invitations stopped, when the ambient drift of casual acquaintance collapsed, what remained was short. 5 people. 10 at most. The handful who kept messaging. The handful who organized a weekly video call. The handful who, even without an agenda, wanted to actually see you. Research on relationship maintenance in restricted conditions, including work by Julianne Holt-Lundstad and colleagues, has consistently shown that external crises reveal the true density of someone's social network faster and more accurately than any normal period. For people who secretly thrived during lockdown, the audit was often a relief. They discovered, with some surprise, that the network they had been managing at 80% capacity for years was, in reality, a much smaller and more specific thing. The 30 work acquaintances were not friends. They were contractually adjacent. The monthly obligation dinners were not connection. They were theater. The handful who stayed through the silence were, it turned out, the whole point. Coming out of lockdown, many of these people did not go back. They did not reactivate the wider network, not because they were bitter, but because they had seen the actual shape of their relational life and could no longer pretend not to, which is its own kind of gift. Painful, clarifying, permanent. There is a weird paradox at the core of this experience. The people who secretly loved the quiet are often now the people with the most carefully designed lives. They moved. They went freelance. They negotiated hard for remote work and meant it. They cut their commitments in half. They became skilled at saying no in a world that rewards saying yes. Not because they are selfish, because they were finally given enough information about themselves to stop performing. This is not a flaw in the mind. It is just a particular architecture, one that is, frankly, better suited to a quieter world than the world offers by default. Better suited to being chosen by a small circle than to being seen by a large one. Better suited to a life built on fit than to a life built on endurance. So what does all this actually mean? If some part of you is still quietly guilty about the fact that you, personally, were happier in 2020 than you were in 2019, you do not have to be. You are not rooting for a catastrophe. You were just briefly matched to a pace that your nervous system had been asking for your entire adult life. The lockdown was not your ideal world. It was your first evidence that a different pace was even possible. The next time you catch yourself longing for that quiet and feeling guilty for it, remember, you are not mourning a tragedy, you are mourning a glimpse. And wanting more of yourself, quietly, is not a sign you missed the lesson. It is the lesson. If this resonated with you, please subscribe. And if you want to support these deep dives, consider hitting that join button to become a channel member. I would genuinely appreciate it.